Alright, and so in this video, we're going to be going over the forms of Greek nouns. Greek nouns, like Latin nouns that you should be familiar with, are going to be declined, inflected. That is, an inflection is an ending that you put on a noun, and that ending determines then letting you know what the function of the noun in the sentence is. So, you can see the chart behind me that is located right here, and we in Greek are only going to be going over the first and second declension, feminine and masculine neuter for second declension, which mirrors exactly what you have in Latin. So if you were to pan over and actually look at the Latin that we have over here, you can see that, again, it's the exact same way with feminine and then masculine and neuter. So it should be familiar to you in at least some small ways. And we have, of course, those endings that are obviously going to be here. Now, there's one thing that you need to know as we are looking at my chart, and that is that there is, in Greek, a case that does not exist that does exist in Latin. Here you can see the nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative, and thus the one that is missing is your first item that you need to put in for your Easy 100.
Your first word is ablative. A-L-B-A-L-T-I-V-E. Ablative.
That's okay. Alrighty. So, just make sure again you spell that correctly. A-B-L-A-T-I-V-E. Ablative. It does not exist in Greek. Alrighty. So we move on and we will start in the first declension. Now, because we are learning Attic Greek, we are going to have, instead of an alpha, which is what you would expect as the analog to an A, we are actually going to have an eta. And that is because it is the dialect that we have in Athens. And so therefore, in other dialects, it would be that alpha, but we are going to have eta. And so here it is then going to be all the way down from the nominative to accusative plural. So, here it is with an eta and an eta sigma and an eta iota subscript. You are going to come to learn that dative singular equals iota subscript. It's how you can remember that it is dative singular. And then eta with a nu. Once you move into the plural, however, the alpha then makes its return. And so therefore you have alpha iota, you have omega nu. Now, it could be any word whatsoever in the whole of the Greek language. The genitive plural is going to be own. So it's going to be all the way across, and if I were to add the third declension, it would still be that for the genitive plural. It's the easiest ending because it is the same for all. Then for the dative, you have ice, and then for the accusative you have os. Now again, as an analog, when you look at some of these, it should look rather familiar to the Latin. Particularly look at the os that you have. You go over here, and there is the os. And again, I have it written here somewhat. It might be difficult to see, but that long is, that is the dative plural, it is from the alpha iota sigma that one can see. And so in that way, it is a easy way to remember them by thinking about how does it compare to the Latin. Now, I'd like to point out that letter that I've just been talking about, it is going to be something to help you remember not only dative singular, but also appears in the nominative plural, you see it there, and in the dative plural. And thus we come to the second word that you are needing to know and put in for your free 100, and that word is?
Your second word is iota. I-O-T-A.
Excellent. So we move on to the second declension. The second declension is sometimes in Indo-European, so that would be both in Greek and Latin, known as the O stem. And so if you think about it in terms of, let's say, Latin Sesame Street, when you're learning the fourth declension is brought to you by the letter U, because you see U's all over the place. And the fifth declension is brought to you by the letter E, because you see it all over the place. Third declension in Latin is brought to you by the letter I. Well, the second declension in both Greek and Latin is what we call O stem, because you can see Omicron all over the place. And so instead of a US that you would have in Latin, in Greek it is an OS with os. Then you have oo in genitive singular. Then you of course have the omega with, again, iota subscript. I say iota subscript, you say dative singular. I say dative singular, you say iota subscript. And then Omicron nu. Remember that the nu sound is a nasal sound, and that out of your nose is the same as the m, out of the nose. And so that m that you see in Latin all the way across with versus is going to be somewhat reflected in that other nasal sound that we have here. Then of course you have, just like I in the feminine, here in the second declension you have oi. As we always know, Genitive plural is own. Then, of course, ois, that would be like ice. And then finally, us, that you have as well. And so please note, if we were to go back over there again, long is in Latin is ois, and here it would be os, if you were to have sung the song of the second declension masculine in Latin. It's just that that upsilon has dropped out. But please remember that across the whole in the plural is that case genitive own, and we can go ahead and write it in there as it is going to be genitive own. And I would argue as well that that same case in the singular is one of the more difficult ones to remember because it does not have a clear analog. And that brings us to our third word that you simply have to put in order to obviously get your easy 100, and that word is?
Your third word is genitive. G-E-N-I-T-I-V-E.
Very good. Now, we move on to the neuter. Now, the great news for neuters, as we all know, is that the neuters are almost always going to be the same in everywhere, but, and again, that iota subscript, the nominative and accusative. Now, obviously, it's not going to be the same because remember that the rule is nominatives and accusatives in Indo-European are the same. And so here it is going to be own. It matches up just like it does on the Latin chart, but it has to then be own as well. And so we look again at the analog of maybe panning over a little bit to the Latin chart that I have here. We can see that again, do you see how they are the same, and It's just that in the nominative they won't be the same. Exact same in Greek, as it were. We continue out, and thus we have the second rule of neuters that we all know. All nominative plurals always end in A. But this time it is obviously going to be alpha and alpha. And so that is the whole of it that you have when it comes to the first feminine, second masculine, and second neuter. Now, to kill two birds with one stone, always when I teach the declension endings, simultaneously I like to point out an incredibly important aspect. And if we were to pan over in this direction and look at the passage that we have here for 1 beta, I can point out instances of this thing occurring all the time. And that would be what we call the definite article. The word the in English is the definite article, as opposed to the indefinite article, which is a and an. And Greek is really a language that emphasizes, uses, and has the definite article almost always. And so here you can see the definite article, the definite article, the definite article, the definite article. I could keep going on in every single instance in which it appears. Here also, the definite article. And that means it's the field, and the field, and the stones, and the stone heap, as it were. And note that the definite article almost always is going to reflect the ending that you see there. That is dative singular, iota subscript. We have here accusative, identical. You have accusative plural, identical, and so forth and so on. Now, sometimes it won't be. That's because this is a third declension word being combined with the definite article that is going to reflect first and second declension endings, and so it might not be the same, but very often it will be. And something to always keep in mind is that when reading Greek, whether it's just in these passages or on the National Greek exam, your best friend will be the definite article. I'll give you an example of why really quickly. This word is third declension. We never learned third declension in my Greek class. However, we know that it is accusative because it is the object of the preposition that is implying motion towards. That means to or towards. But you don't know if it is masculine, feminine, or neuter. You do. And the reason why you do is because the definite article will show the way. The definite article is by far your best friend. And so I'm going to be putting that here right next, and you'll be able to see how it matches up in that the masculine is going to reflect the second masculine, the feminine is going to reflect the first feminine endings, and the neuter are going to reflect then that. For whatever reason, in language, Latin especially, and Greek, whenever you write adjectives, which really the definite article functions like, you go in a pattern of masculine, feminine, neuter, but when you write the noun endings, you almost always go first, second, and second, for whatever reason. However, that brings us to our fourth word that you will need to put in for your easy 100, and that is what we are talking about right now.
Your fourth word is definite. D-E-F-I-N-I-T-E.
There it is, the definite article. So let's go ahead and put that right over here. And so, it is going to look like the following. Just like we saw a second ago, masculine is ho. It is an omicron with a rough breathing diacritical mark. It has no accent. And instead of going vertically, I'm going to go horizontally. Ho, and then of course, hey, and if you were to look at that, comparative with that, you see how it really is the exact same thing, but that dash means an ending. You would never have a dash for definite articles because they're words. Right, Felix?
Yeah.
Okay. Nevertheless, we move on. And over here, we have to. That is then going to be with an accent, acute. For the genitive, you really see how it lines up here, in which it is going to be to, just like oo. It'll be taste, just like ace, and it'll be again to. And this is something that you really need to keep in mind, that it is when the definite article, the dative and genitive, and the genitive and dative, singular or plural, has circumflex, circumflex, circumflex always. And when it is a diphthong, you put the diacritical mark, accent or otherwise, on the second letter of the diphthong. Dative, did anybody say dative?
Yeah, that's subscript.
Iota subscript indeed. So there it is with toe, just like O. There it is with te, just like A. And there it is again with toe, just like that. And so you can see how they really match up rather clearly. Finally with the accusative, right there, it'll be ton with an acute, and it'll be tain with an acute, but then it's not going to be that because remember it has to be the same, and so again it is going to be toe. Now, I want to interject at this point to point out something important, and that would be when we pan back over here to the passage, please note that, and let me go ahead and get this business out of the way, when we look at that, the reason why it is not an acute but a grave is that remember, when you have another word following that syllable that has an accent, acute, if there is no intervening punctuation, it will turn into a grave. So in my chart, that would be an acute, but in the context with another word following it, it would be a grave. And so therefore, we continue on into the plurality. And again, you see that correlation between the actual endings and the definite article. So here it would be hoy, just like oi, with a rough breather, over the second letter of the diphthong, because that's where the diacritical mark goes. Hi, again, no accent, and as what we would expect, and ta, with an acute, but only in my chart. Once it goes in a passage, you're almost always going to have it be a grave, because the next word will be there without intervening punctuation, because remember, it means the. And then for the genitive, oh, I think we know what we have here. Genitive plural.
Oh.
Thank you. Alrighty. I'm telling you, Greek class is shining brightly today. Nevertheless, we move on to the data plural. And again, it matches up with tois, move out the way so you can see it, and tais, move out the way so you can see it, and of course, tois again. Finally, we get to the accusative plural, and thus it is going to be as what we would expect, tous, just like us, with that accent, but remember, it turns to a grave in the passage. And then you have tas, that with a long A, and again with the accent, but it turns into a grave. And then finally, ta, that one sees right there. And so, once you learn the endings, you really learn the definite articles, and once you've learned the definite articles, you really learn the endings. And so we come to the very last item that we are going to be putting in for that, and that would be the definite article in the neuter singular.
Your fifth word is toe. T-O.
There it is, and here you can see it, to and to, and to point that out over here, to. How do you know that it is accusative and not nominative? Because that has to be the accusative object of the preposition, but it also then reveals to you that then has got to be neuter because that neuter to ending. So, hopefully you've gotten all 5 of your items. I appreciate and thank my Greek class for doing such a fantastic job, and hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Thank you so much.
Yay.